Welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I'm Mike Christensen, and this is the series where I break down the lessons we can learn, as GMs and as players, from episodes of Critical Role. Today we're tackling episode 79, Thordak. And before we begin, just a quick comment response. The last video had me responding to a bunch of different comments, but there's just one I wanted to highlight. It was actually in my Discord. Somebody noticed that the lighting seemed a little bit strange in my last video. I was indeed trying to fix some lighting problems, and I think I finally got it right. I was getting a lot of help from Dottie at Mystic Arts DM, a fellow Dungeon tuber, and it's funny because he actually just put out a video about using lighting as a metaphor for how we introduce NPCs to our players. It's a really great video, and I can speak from experience that Dottie definitely knows what he's talking about. And he was also super nice. He hopped on a call with me to help me with camera settings, even though it was like midnight his time, and he was in the middle of editing a video that had to go out the next day, but he was so generous with his time and his knowledge, so if you haven't checked out his channel, go give it a watch, he's awesome. Also, I got the feedback that some people were less than thrilled that the comment responses at the top of the last video were so fully focused on politics. So good news, no comment responses on that topic today because a lot of commenters didn't really get into the weeds with politics with me. People either appreciated the politics stuff or they didn't, but not a lot of people went 5 rounds on the actual arguments I was making, which was a nice change of pace from last time. And if you love the politics and you want more of it in these videos, I love you. You're a little freak like me. Okay, I do have one comment reply for this video that is kind of politics related. It's gonna be very fast. If you're a centrist just trying to advocate for a peaceful dialogue between both sides, I need you to ask yourself, if a stranger walked up and started stabbing somebody standing next to you, and that person started screaming for help, what's the centrist compromise between those two positions? The first person wants the second person to die, and the second person doesn't want to die. How are you going to get us to a happy medium? You're not. You can't find middle ground with fascists. Stop carrying water for them. Join us in trying to get the knife out of their hands, or just sit down and stop pretending you're doing anyone any good. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's move on to the content most of you probably came here for, Critical Role. This is the last episode they aired in 2016, and it also features a cool development. Matt Mercer got permission to use some new music from World of Warcraft. Or, not new music, but new to the channel. And the fact that we're going to hear music we'd never heard before during the Thordak fight is kind of incredible. It makes him feel like a boss monster because he has his own boss monster music. This is definitely something I recommend and I've done in my own games. Having your main music for most D&D battles, but then also setting aside or tracking down certain music tracks to use for specific monsters or villains. But we'll talk about that another day when I do a whole video about using music in your D&D games. Ashley isn't able to join them for this game, so Laura and Liam are working together to run Pike. Matt describes how Thordak is scanning the environment, looking for them, just like he was at the end of the last episode. They all drink their potions of fire resistance, and Matt rolls a perception check. Because Thordak is so perceptive, there's a chance he'll even notice them just because they popped a few corks off of potion bottles. But he rolls a 1, so Thordak doesn't notice them. Vex casts Pass Without Trace on the party to help them sneak, and Matt rolls a perception check to see if the dragon hears the verbal component of the spell. And unfortunately, he does. This is a really cool way to make the players feel how incredibly perceptive Thordak is. It actually calls back to something like the Smaug scene in The Hobbit, where you do get the sense that this ancient dragon has really keen senses. I definitely think it would be crazy to do this in most other circumstances, rolling a perception check every single time the players did anything. But in this case, I think it kind of works. I think it's still kind of a dirty trick, but it also helps represent one of the classic dragon archetypes, so I kind of like it. So Thordak spots them, we roll for initiative, and obviously this dude has a whole bunch of hit points, so we are seriously not going to cover every single thing that happens in this session. We're just going to hit the highlights. That's going to make it seem like the players aren't attacking him or doing any damage, but they are definitely constantly shooting at him and slashing at him and casting spells and doing all the stuff, but a lot of it is just not going to be very instructive for today's purposes. So just assume, after everything I talk about, a bunch of player characters and NPCs shoot at Thordak and do him some damage. But first things first. Here we see the battle map that Matt has prepared. And we have a little bit of an issue. See, in the last episode, I loved the way Matt described the ruins of the Cloudtop District, in part because it seemed to set up the idea that Thordak would have to fight them in and amongst these buildings. But now that we're actually here, Thordak is so big that the whole idea that this fight would be weaving in between buildings is sort of moot. Because not only are these buildings partially ruined, which Matt described in the last episode, but this means they don't necessarily offer a ton of cover from above, which is completely fair. It would have seemed very, very strange if there was a completely intact house 20 feet from Thordak's volcano cauldron. But the other problem is that these buildings are just so much smaller than he is. You can imagine that if this was any of the other ancient dragons, hiding behind some of these ruins would still offer the players some more cover, at least until the dragon took to the air. But Thordak is so tall, hiding behind this rubble basically doesn't even matter. The other problem is, Thordak has no reason to move right now. If the players take cover, he can breathe fire and still hit them. And as we'll see later in the fight, when we get a better angle from above, the buildings are actually spread out far enough that I think Thordak can move between them. But that means these buildings just sort of feel like random terrain dropped into places on the map rather than actually feeling like you're moving around inside a city block. And to some degree that makes sense. I mean, these were mansions. It's not like they would all be cramped together. It's not a suburb. But it does still feel like we're missing out on what I thought would have been a really interesting encounter where we get some environmental storytelling and also an interesting bit of terrain. And we also see that the area where Thordak is standing and everything basically behind him is just an open field, which makes sense. That is where his crater is. But now it means that if the players move into the back half of the map, they're basically in another one of Matt Mercer's patented columns/arenas. Additionally, in the last episode, Matt described pools of magma. But there are no pools of magma. I mean, they were kind of bubbling up and forming fumaroles or little volcanic spires, but there's none of those anymore either. These are basically gone. There are effectively no interesting, dangerous pieces of terrain on the field, the way there were when the players fought the Black Dragon in his lair. And that's a real shame, because something like that would have basically made any choice of movement on the battlefield a lot more interesting. Now, to be fair, I can absolutely understand why Matt made that decision. It seems to me like he basically wants the entire terrain to seem relatively consistent because he doesn't want the players to be able to predict where the layer actions are going to come from. That was part of the issue with the Black Dragon layer, was that they kind of knew they just needed to stay away from the acid pools because that's where the layer actions were going to happen. But in this map, any piece of terrain can basically erupt into a geyser of magma or a fumarole venting poison gas without any notice. So if there are pools of magma on the field, Matt might feel like that's where the magma should spray up. If there are fumaroles on the field, that's where the poison gas should vent from. I can't say that for sure. I don't know that that's definitely what his mindset would have been, but I mean, that's how my brain works. I would probably focus my layer actions to take place near the relevant pieces of terrain. So by not including any visual signifiers of those traps, you can better deploy them anywhere on the battlefield when you hit initiative count 20. But I do kind of still think you could do both. You can have pools of magma that the players have to avoid standing in, and also have jets of magma that spray out at random times from random places. But maybe Matt doesn't want to deploy pools of magma yet because he knows that some of those will appear in Thordak's actual subterranean layer once they get down there. But if that's the case, well, he still described bursts of magma in the last episode. He still made it seem like the terrain was going to be at least a little bit more interesting than it is in this episode. And that's a shame. Even once we hit the point in the session where the layer actions start going off and blasts of magma start attacking the players from below, Taliesin asks if there's now a hole where that magma sprayed up. And Matt will say, no, it was a spray, and then it sort of splattered down and cooled, but they don't see an obvious fissure anymore. But maybe the answer should have been yes. Maybe every layer action leaves a scar on the battlefield that will in some way restrict Vox Machina's movement going forward. Magma erupts upwards in a geyser. Now there's a pool of magma you have to avoid. Poison gas sprays out of the ground, and it's still spilling out and blocking visibility in that area. And also, if you stand there, you're going to fall into a hole in the ground. And in fairness to Matt, the poison gas does linger on this battlefield throughout the session. It doesn't do anything to the party because they're immune to poison thanks to the Hero's Feast, but he was at least trying to make sure it stayed on the board. But there's no problem with standing wherever the poison emanated from. There's no crack in the ground they have to avoid now. And to be fairer to Matt in a broader sense, I realize hindsight is 20/20 at best. The idea of a battle map decaying with each layer action probably didn't occur to Matt. But it's something that occurred to me when Taliesin asked that question. Or at least when I heard him asking that question this time around when I was writing the script 9 years after the game first happened. But that's probably something I'm going to steal for future encounters because it also functions as a really interesting ticking clock. Every round that passes where the dragon is still alive is going to add more interesting hazards to the battlefield, as it basically erodes under your feet. And if you want a narrative justification for it, you can say that Thordak's rage in this battle is amplifying the volcanic nature of the battlefield. Or the more damage Thordak takes, the more of his internal fire is released from his body, and as these radiating waves of energy from the elemental plane of fire seep out of him, they make the surrounding environment even more volcanic and dangerous. And I do think Matt would get a little bit more comfortable with the idea of battle maps that evolve as the fight continues, as we get further into the campaign. By the time we reach the end of it, and they do the level 20 battle royale, which I've talked before about on this channel, but that map had a lot of changing environmental details, with magical walls slowly crushing the battlefield. So again, it's not Matt's fault that he didn't think of this specific potential solution. But I still wish he had done something, because this map is just kind of underwhelming. After the first player moves in initiative, Matt tells them that in all the chaos, they didn't realize it, but they've lost track of Larkin. Which, for those who need a little bit of a reminder, Larkin is Raishan in disguise. Keyleth casts Tsunami on Thordak. She's cast a similar spell in the past, Tidal Wave, to great effect, and this is like the supreme version of that. But part of the reason that was so incredibly effective in the past is because there were lots of bad guys on the field. It's not really the ideal spell to use on a solo bad guy, but she's hoping that the spell will restrain Thordak in place. But at first, it has no effect at all. Thordak doesn't even have to roll, because when Matt first reads the spell, it seems to him like it has no impact at all on a creature that's larger than huge. And the players didn't realize this, but Thordak is definitely larger than huge. I believe he's gargantuan. Actually, he might be colossal. All the dragons are gargantuan, but his miniature is at least colossal, and I assume narratively he's the same, even though that's not technically an official rule in 2014 D&D. And Matt tries to, I guess, comfort Marisha by saying, well, hey, 8th level spell. Like, hey, look on the bright side. Isn't it cool that you can now cast 8th level spells? But what Marisha hears is, also you wasted your most powerful resource. Because, look, I know Matt was not trying to salt the wound, but I also get where Marisha's coming from. She's already frustrated, and that comment just sort of reinforces why she's frustrated. But then Matt realizes he scrolled past the part in the spell where it says every creature in the spell does take damage. It just doesn't restrain him or keep doing damage every round, because he's too big for that. And it also seems at this point like maybe Thordak will have to keep rolling on future rounds after all. Matt says both, and it wasn't really clear how he was going to rule it going forward. But of course, it's a strength saving throw, so when he's first hit with the spell, Thordak rolls a 21. He only needed a 20. And look, this entire exchange is such a perfect microcosm of how so many of the different Keyleth spell disputes have gone in this campaign. Marisha wants to use a spell that is similar to another spell that she's used in the past that worked really well against other foes. She doesn't really realize that it's not going to be as effective as it could be in this situation because she's never used this spell before, because druids have lots and lots of spells, and so she's frequently using new ones for the first time. And also a lot of D&D players assume fire dragons should be vulnerable to cold or water damage because at the end of the day, we all want to treat dragon like Pokemon. We want ancient dragons to be vulnerable to the opposite element instead of just immune to their own element, but that's a topic for another day. But then, after Marisha casts the spell, Matt reads it and misunderstands something. So just like what happened back with episode 48, with both Find the Path and with Blindsight, Matt's initial ruling is wrong because he misunderstood or misread the spell. And it makes it seem like Marisha didn't know what the spell would actually do, when actually Matt didn't know what the spell did. Then Marisha gets frustrated because she used a huge resource in a way that now seems like it will have no impact. And then Matt realizes he was wrong, and then he actually adjudicates the effects of the spell correctly. But of course, this will be remembered as Marisha not reading her spell, even though she did read the spell. In this case, she just didn't realize Thordak was that much bigger than the other dragons they fought. But it will, of course, be remembered in some viewers' minds as her not knowing her spells. Just a perfect summary of how so many of these interactions have gone. Marisha just could not catch a break in this campaign. But also, very soon, Matt is going to have a fire elemental jump out of the rubble and attack Vox Machina. So I kind of wonder if maybe a cool thing to do when your player casts something like Tsunami is to reveal that there were a bunch of hidden fire elementals and salamanders that are immediately killed and washed away off the battlefield. Kind of make it seem like the spell actually did something because there were these bad guys waiting in the wings to ambush them, because you can use that to foreshadow the fact that there are potentially other bad guys still on the field hiding, besides just Thordak. And this can also help make it clear that this spell is really best to use as crowd control rather than just against one single foe. But Matt runs a very simulationist game, especially at this point in the campaign, so he's not going to invent bad guys who are waiting around Thordak just to make it seem like the 8th level spell did something it didn't do. But, look, if your player casts an 8th level spell and it would have literally done nothing, then that might be a fun way to use that spell as a way to foreshadow future threats, and kind of give the player a little bit of an olive branch to make it feel like, even if they didn't get the full impact they expected, they at least had some sort of impact on the battlefield, even if you're just inventing a couple of bad guys that you're immediately killing to make them feel a little cooler. I don't think there's any real harm in that, but I know that not everyone would agree. But it would also teach the player that this is a crowd control spell and not suited for individual bad guys, and I do think there's some benefit in that. Gilmore casts Disintegrate on Thordak. It's a save or suck spell, and the dragon makes the save, which means nothing happens. And that actually allows Keyleth to have a moment to commiserate with him about spending high-level spells that didn't seem to do much, and that is a nice moment. I think that's actually a nice gesture from Matt of like, you're not the only one going through this, Gilmore had this moment too. 8th level spell is a little bit worse than a 6th level spell, because Gilmore does have multiple 6th level spell slots, but I think it still counts. When he gets to Grog's turn, Grog starts to run across the battlefield, but then Matt interrupts him because Thordak and Grog both got the same initiative. So Thordak just takes his entire turn in the middle of Grog's turn. And this is a weird thing that has never happened before, and it will never happen again. Even after just 2 rounds, Matt stops doing it. But it seems like the problem is that Matt is trying really hard to make initiative make sense. Like if you both rolled the same initiative, you would act at exactly the same time. But initiative is definitionally an abstraction. It's something that we use to make combat easier to track, so we don't have everybody acting at exactly the same time, and you can't resolve everybody's actions because you're trying to listen and hear what everyone's saying as they all talk over each other. This is often a criticism of initiative. It feels like you're suddenly playing an entirely different game. And obviously when this team went on to work on Daggerheart, they took a different approach with figuring out how initiative would work in their game. So it feels to me like Matt was doing what basically lots of people do with lots of different game mechanics. He was saying, okay, if this is how initiative works, how can we reflect that within the fiction itself? I've made videos where I look at specific mechanics like armor class and hit points, which are absolutely game mechanics that don't neatly map onto the reality of the world of the game, and I try to figure out what's happening within the world of the game based on how these mechanics work. Because I think that's a fun exercise and it makes it easier for you to narrate the mechanic when you're actually dealing with it in battle. But in this case, Matt is kind of doing the opposite. Rather than figuring out how to narrate initiative in a way that makes sense, he's taking a much more strange tactic where he's treating shared initiative as if these results literally mean that you're taking your turns at the same time during each other's turns, which really is the strangest way to resolve shared initiative. Thankfully, he never ever does this again because it seems like he realized it was a bad idea. Not only is it not exactly fair for you to give your player a chance to move and then your monster takes their entire movement and action and then the player gets to finish their turn. Like, if you want them to share initiative, break up the villain's turn as well. But also, this approach completely screws over Grog, because he might move into a certain position, but then not get to take his action, and then Thordak moves and takes his attack, and now Grog's movement doesn't make sense because he couldn't use his action at the end of his movement, and if he had known his target was going to be somewhere else, when he started his turn, he wouldn't have rushed to that place, because now he can't swing his weapon. And barbarians already have this problem in combat enough, chasing enemies around the battlefield because they don't have great ranged options. So you don't need to further complicate the situation with an initiative ruling like this one. Again, after the first couple of turns, Matt stops interrupting Travis's turns, but they still don't know who should go first between Grog and Thordak. So basically, Travis just starts offering to see if Matt would like to go first, the way he might with another player. The solution here, by the way, is just either give them the first turn to whoever has a higher dexterity modifier, or just have them roll against each other. Or do both. Dexterity modifier resolves ties. If they have the same modifier, then just have them roll off. That's what I do in my games. It's what Matt will do in future games. It's much simpler. But anyway, Thordak takes his first action to breathe fire on almost the entire party. They take 99 points of fire damage, and the dexterity save for half damage is a DC 24. Scanlan uses cutting words to reduce it by 5, so that's cool. It's only 94 damage. However, even if they fail their saves, they're still taking half damage thanks to their potions of fire resistance, so it's not as bad as it sounds. But Trinket is immediately brought to 0 hit points and returns to the locket, and Gilmore is very badly burned. Kima casts Aura of Vitality on herself to make her a better healer in combat, and then she heals Gilmore. And look, obviously Matt is playing Kima just like always, so I don't know how I can say that this is not something she would do, but also I don't feel like that's something she would do. It feels like, based on previous battles, she is much more direct. She's much more interested in attacking creatures rather than healing other people. But this is a great choice from Matt, because it basically lets the party know that they have a healer on staff, which frees up the twins to run Pike in a way where she can actually do damage. And it also gives Matt a great excuse to avoid an NPC getting the kill on the ancient evil dragon, because that's something he really wants to avoid in all of his games. Now, Pike does give them a healing bonus. She casts Beacon of Hope, so everyone in the party gets max possible healing whenever something would heal them. It's really clutch. But she also is now free to do a little more damage in the future if she wants to. Also, I mentioned earlier that this was their last episode of the year, which means this is their last episode before Christmas. So let's take a little break from the lessons and just enjoy a little Christmas tune.
You know Ryshawn and Voragol, the frigid doom. Brimscythe and Umbrasil we killed in his room. But do you recall the most fucked up dragon of all? Thordak the Cinder King had a very shiny gem. And if you ever saw it, run the fuck away from him.
On the second round, Matt has realized that he forgot to do any layer actions, so he now frames it as like a fun reveal.
Now, at the top of this round, we're going to start doing layer actions.
What is it?
No! Layer actions are the worst.
Oh no!
It happens after Percy's turn, though.
Oh,
Okay.
good.
So Percy, your go.
He also forgot to do any legendary actions, so he starts deploying those as well after some players' turns. But I love the way he reframes layer actions as this reveal, this twist that will now complicate the battle. It's a fun way to acknowledge your mistake, but still ramp up the tension. It's pretty cool. It's a very small trick, but I like it. At this point, Ryshawn flies down out of the clouds and lands next to Thordak. He smiles because now his most powerful ally is here, and they're going to destroy Vox Machina together. And she seems to confirm it. She agrees that they are going to destroy the party together. And the players are very tense here. They've been worried that she's going to betray them ever since she first revealed herself to them. And this could potentially be a great opportunity for her to turn on them and reveal that all this has been an extremely elaborate trap. Ryshawn takes a deep breath in and blasts poison gas into Thordak's face. She's working with the party after all. Thordak uses his frightful presence to try to give all the players the frightened condition, but the party's all immune to fear. Except for Jarrett. This may be one of the dangers of bringing this many NPC allies with you into battle. Your powerful buff spells like Hero's Feast don't protect enough people for you to cover the entire party. Also, at this point, 2 fire elementals burst out of the buildings near where the party is hidden, so now we have some new minions being added to the battlefield. And this is going to continue as the fight goes on. Throughout the combat, new allies of Thordak will join the fight. And this is a really nice ticking clock. It helps ramp up the tension and make it all the more necessary to kill Thordak as fast as possible. And as we'll see, each new monster is more powerful than the last one that joined the battle, so it really is an excellent ticking clock. But also, Matt takes a moment to narrate that high above in the clouds, not visible to most of them because they failed their perception checks, but the skyship is here. Considering that they sent the skyship to Whitestone, and then they told Whitestone to send it to Fort Daxio, and then they rerouted it to Amon, but as far as we knew, it had never actually arrived in any of these locations. I'm very glad Matt narrated that it has arrived and is helping in the battle, as they hear the sound of ballista bolts being launched from the ship and down at Thordak. I don't really know how it got here. I'm going to assume that Allura knows Captain Damon, even though we really have no reason to believe that's the case. Except, we know this is the same skyship Lady Kima was on when she rode with Vox Machina to bring the Horn of Orcus to Vasselheim. So maybe Allura saw them off. And maybe while Tiberius was taking his selfie of the party on the skyship deck, Allura took Kima aside and took her by the hands, and they looked into each other's eyes. And as the conductor blew the whistle, Captain Damon called out to see if they were ready to set sail, Allura saw him and memorized his face, because Allura had just gotten Kima back, and now she was leaving on Damon's ship, and so Allura silently pleaded with Damon to keep Kima safe on this trip in the hopes that the two of them would see each other once again and their love can be rekindled. Sorry, that was weird. Not sure what came over me. Anyway, moving on. Vax drinks the potion of invulnerability and starts closing the distance with Thordak, attacking him and then flying away, even though the potion could probably help him survive a few hits at close range, but he doesn't want to risk it. Whenever it comes to Scanlan's turn, the other players start mimicking playing a flute, which is their way of saying, it's time to play the flute and summon our brass dragon ally so they can come and help us kill the red dragon. But Sam continuously refuses to do so. And he has his reasons, because I think he knows that they're going to need Devosa's help when they fight Raishan, and he doesn't want Devosa to show up, help kill Thordak, and then consider their deal complete and leave when the party still has another dragon to fight. This is the first example I can think of where Sam is basically playing the game in an intense battle scene with one hand behind his back, holding onto a resource he's planning to use at another key moment. It'll not be the last example of that. Some wyverns with lizardfolk riders fly out of the sky to attack the party. This is more escalating of adding minions to the battlefield, but Raishan intercepts at least one of them and battles them in the air. And that's a great move from Matt to still have her contributing to the fight, but not doing a lot of damage to Thordak, because it's more dramatic if that's being done by the players rather than by her. It's also a good way to give her all of her legendary actions without unbalancing the fight. That being said, there are still some wyverns on the field that the players need to deal with. They get past Raishan and start harassing the heroes. As the fight goes on, Matt starts narrating how Thordak is just laughing madly and saying things like, we'll kill them all, we'll kill them all. He's trying to pay off everything he set up in the previous sessions about how Thordak is going insane. But of course, this makes the players a little paranoid that he might not be crazy. He might literally be talking to somebody they can't see. But that's just a theory. There's no way to verify that right now. Gilmore casts Disintegrate, hits Thordak this time, deals 88 damage, and visibly wounds Thordak's chest and neck. And this reveals the fact that Thordak does, in fact, still have the soul anchor embedded in his body. His scales and flesh had just grown over it. And I really like how Matt used Disintegrate as a narrative tool to basically reveal this clue and give the players some way to feel like they can fundamentally change the battle in some pretty profound ways by targeting a specific weak point. And there's some aspects of this that I don't love if we zoom out a bit and look at what else Matt has established about the soul anchor, but we'll get there. Thordak hits them all with another fire breath, dealing 102 damage. Gilmore goes down, and Pike is low. Kima heals Gilmore, so at least he's not actively dying anymore. Vex fires her last Dragon Slayer arrow, but as she reaches for it, Matt tells her that she actually has two, and one of them has a piece of paper tied around it like a note. The implication here is that it came from Zara, that she had basically snuck the Dragon Slayer arrow into Vex's quiver before they parted ways. Vex shoots with one of the arrows, and misses. And it's such a bummer. That is kind of the problem with magical ammunition in D&D. If your player chooses to use it, and they miss, then they basically just wasted their magic item, and that kind of sucks. Makes me wish there were some more magic bows in the Dungeon Master's Guide. There's literally only one magic bow in the 2014 DMG, and I think two in the 2024 DMG. That's BS. We need more magic bows, because we can see the difference when Vax attacks with the Dragon Slayer longsword. Although in this case he doesn't miss and, waste it, he actually rolls a natural 20. So thanks to his critical sneak attack damage, he deals 102 damage back to Thordak. That's pretty cool. Then he also hits with Whisper and does a very respectable 25 damage, even with no sneak attack. However, this is when Matt narrates that the Dragon Slayer longsword carved through a good chunk of flesh, which is very awesome, but also consistent with how he describes that sword whenever it's been used on a dragon. It's like supernaturally designed to slice through dragon flesh like a hot knife through butter. But then Matt describes how Whisper made contact with the crystal and it began to crack. Liam didn't even say he was targeting the crystal, but this is basically Matt telling the players that they have permission to target the crystal and they are making progress if they do so. Although he might actually be saying something else, and we'll get to that in a minute. A fire giant also joins the battlefield on Thordak's, I think his 4th turn? On one of Thordak's turns. But the party rolls a quick perception check because they want to confirm, is this giant coming from the same direction as where we left our friends fighting 2 fire giants? Is Matt trying to imply that our friends were killed or lost that battle? And that's a good thing to confirm. It's a good call for Matt to be very clear about that, at least when he's asked, that no, he's coming from a different direction. This is not one of those giants. Keyleth casts Tidal Wave, which instantly evaporates the elemental and extinguishes the fire on Percy. Very smart use of that spell on her part. Although, technically, I think Tidal Wave would have still been going on the battlefield, and she maybe could have used that. But after the way that spell sort of fizzled on the first round, they kind of just forgot about it. Which I can understand. Or maybe she dropped concentration on it. Actually, that's more likely. On Gilmore's turn, he says Thordak is not looking too good before casting Lightning Bolt on him. That's pretty close to something Matt says whenever one of his big monsters is low on health. He'll say it's looking pretty rough. But for some very inhuman monsters, he holds back on those sorts of details, because the party wouldn't know what looking pretty rough would look like for, like, a beholder. But in this case, Matt actually makes it a line of dialogue, spoken by their beloved and trusted NPC. So when he says Thordak isn't looking too good, that really lights a fire under their butts. No pun intended. Throughout the fight so far, the players have also been discussing, should we send somebody down into the hole behind Thordak, into what they assume is his lair. Travis really wants to go down there, kind of because he's having a really hard time landing any hits on Thordak when he's flying above them. The rest of them seem kind of split on the decision, like they don't know what might be down there, so they don't know the value of going down, but also, there might be something down there that could help them. But credit to Matt, I think he knew Grog might have a hard time dealing with Thordak, which is why there are these other bad guys hitting the battlefield, and fire elementals, and wyverns, and giants. Those give Grog something to do without him having to literally leave the battlefield like they're talking about doing. Thordak's fire breath recharges. Again, he hits them with another blast for 100 damage, and Jarrett is down. Things are starting to look a little rough. Vex shoots her last dragon-slaying arrow, and she hits. And Matt's narration for this moment is very revealing.
As you release the dragon slaying arrow, it goes and hits the side where the chest is currently disintegrated and exposed. As the arrow, using the power of Fenthras behind it, slams into the crystal
Wait, breaks?
shatters.
What?
What?
As it breaks, you watch as Thordak goes, and the form begins to slowly shrink.
Wait, what? Oh, shit! Not dead.
Nope. And just seems to be grinning and laughing through the pain as the swollen primordial dragon form of Thordak begins to slowly wither and wither.
Oh, you have another model?
Yeah.
What?
It's even bigger.
Look at that little beauty little
baby! He's a little baby!
Little baby.
That's still a pretty fucking huge dragon.
Yeah,
Putting that out there.
But that's pretty great.
Oh, he's so sad.
Oh.
But now, like there are hanging folds of dragon hide skin. Like the form shrunk, but portions of it still are kind of just sagging off of it. It's like
Fat bastard.
I was just saying
Yeah,
fat
like fat
bastard.
This is what Matt has been building up to with all these details about the soul anchor that he's been establishing over these past few rounds. First, Gilmore did enough damage to expose the jewel hidden under Thordak's flesh. And the fact that it was a disintegrate spell was kind of perfect because that is literally how the spell works. It disintegrates flesh. But I might imagine Matt could have done the same thing if Gilmore had done an incredible amount of lightning damage, because I kind of suspect this reveal was tied to Thordak's hit points. I don't know that for sure. Maybe he really did wait for a disintegrate spell to land, but that's a risky move to gatekeep important exposition behind a roll like that. And besides, maybe this is just because I cut my teeth on 4th edition, where that was where I became a DM, and characters at half their hit points were bloodied, and new and interesting things would happen when they hit that threshold, but I personally like tying progress to specific amounts of damage taken. But however he decided it would happen, that was the first step. Reveal that the crystal had just been covered in scales and now it's exposed. Then Vax attacked the dragon and Matt narrated that Whisper hit the gem and it was starting to crack. Then Vex hit him with the dragon-slaying arrow and the crystal shattered. None of these players ever said they were targeting the gem. This wasn't the glowing target they had to hit. Thordak is not a video game boss, not really. I do kind of wonder if he hoped they were going to specifically target the crystal, but they just didn't, so he just narrated that their strikes were still doing damage to the crystal itself. And speaking of the bloodied condition, I had always suspected or imagined that this was basically something that was always going to happen to Thordak once he hit a certain threshold of his hit points, like halfway or something. But I checked crit roll stats, and holy moly, no, this is way past the halfway point in his hit points. The party done about 1,000 damage to him, and spoiler alert, he does not have another 1,000 hit points left. So there may have been a hit point threshold that revealed the gem underneath, like 900 or something, but on rewatching this episode, I don't think it was a hit point threshold that determined when the crystal shattered. It seems, instead, like once the crystal was revealed, it started taking damage anytime a player hit Thordak with one of their vestiges. The Dragon Slayer longsword rips a huge gash in Thordak's flesh, but Whisper cracks the crystal. Matt waits until Laura has finished both of her attacks and describing the damage, but when he's describing that damage, he makes sure to emphasize that she is using Fenthras. And here's the thing. We were told that this crystal was indestructible. In fact, we were told a lot of things about the crystal. We'll come back to that in a minute. But we were told that 2 ancient dragons were not able to destroy it, that it was deliberately designed to be indestructible. But it's just been destroyed, so what's up with that? And I think this is Matt's way of trying to establish that there was a clear and tangible benefit to going and getting all these vestiges, because that's what they would need in order to destroy Thordak's soul anchor and strip away a bunch of his elemental power. One of my least favorite tropes in fantasy stories is when there's this indestructible thing that nobody has managed to figure out how to destroy, so they had to just bury it, and then it gets uncovered and unleashed, but then this unstoppable, indestructible thing is eventually destroyed by, like, a handful of teenagers with attitude or whatever. Because it always begs the question, why couldn't the people who sealed it away destroy it forever? Now, I have still loved stories that have done this. It's not always a complete deal breaker for me, so if you get in the comments and say, what about this, what about that? There are still plenty of examples that I like that also do this. But when they do it, it gets under my skin a little bit. I basically even included the same thing in my own campaign, though, this unstoppable army that was sealed away rather than destroyed. And so, like, I get why you do it. It's very dramatic, and sooner or later I'm going to have to face this challenge myself and figure out how to give that story a satisfying resolution. But I always do appreciate it when there is an actual explanation for why the hero can do the thing that the ancient order of all-powerful wizards never could. Spoilers here for the first Shang-Chi movie. The only one as of recording. But at the end of that movie, there's this big monster that the elders were never able to destroy, so they sealed it away. But then it's released, and our hero has to fight it and kill it, which he's able to do. But the reason our hero can deal with it in the present, and others couldn't do it in the past, is because now he has Wenwu's incredibly powerful magic items, the 10 rings. So you're bringing 2 unrelated pieces of lore together in your world and revealing that, hypothetically, if these 2 factions had known about each other and worked together thousands of years ago, they could have solved this problem, which is also a really nice metaphor for everything going on with Shang-Chi in that film, where he's bringing together his mother's world and his father's world. You get the same thing when his superhero theme is a combination of his mother's musical motif and his father's musical motif. There's some great stuff happening in that movie. They should make some more of those. But I always loved the way that they handled this trope, because they basically solved the issue I have with it. Why did the elders lock away the ancient evil creature rather than killing it, but our hero is able to destroy it for good with no problem? Well, our hero has a different magic item than they did. And as I was rewatching this episode of Critical Role, I realized that I think that's where Matt is going with this, too. There's a larger conversation here about the fact that the party is probably higher level than Allura, and certainly higher level than she was when she fought Thordak the first time around. So that enters into the conversation as well. It's worth considering. But instead of just saying, the Soul Anchor's indestructible, oh, actually, no, never mind, we're in a D&D combat now, so it has hit points now. Matt instead essentially uses the Soul Anchor as a way to highlight the fact that the heroes have uncovered these ancient magical relics that are going to help solve this problem in a way nobody else could. They are rewarded for the quest they just went on for most of this year. Now, there is still some weirdness happening with this scene. First of all, back in episode 73, Raishan definitely told the party that if they destroyed the Soul Anchor, which none of the NPCs have been able to do, but the party still hoped it could be done, and obviously they were right, even though they didn't take any steps to do it themselves, but Matt did have the Soul Anchor get destroyed. But Raishan had told them that destroying this would probably kill Thordak. Obviously, that's not the case. Now, Raishan could have been lying. She is the diseased deceiver, but I don't see that as a lie that makes a lot of sense. She could have just been wrong. I mean, clearly she was wrong. But this also means that the most knowledgeable creatures in the multiverse who knew anything about this crystal at all, which were Raishan and Allura, were all wrong about what would happen when it got destroyed. And that just seems like a very strange thing to do. So part of me also suspects Matt changed his mind. He wanted to include this moment in his game where the anchor was destroyed and Thordak lost a lot of his power, and we'll talk about why he might have done that in a second. But when he was prepping for this moment, he either forgot what he had already established about what would happen when the crystal could have been destroyed, or he just ignored it because he thought this would be a cool moment and he wanted to do this. And that's kind of the explanation that makes the most sense to me. And what's funny is that before Raishan told them that destroying the stone would basically kill Thordak, 9 episodes earlier in episode 64, the party had been told that the reason Thordak was so supernaturally large is because of the stone drawing power from the elemental plane of fire. And so Laura had speculated that destroying the stone might shrink him down. And 15 episodes later, she's the one who gets the shot that destroys the stone and makes him smaller. But here's another kind of important question. Why did Matt do that? Because here's the thing. In fiction in general, and I think especially in D&D, you don't want to minimize the threat of your big, bad final villains. You don't want the players to ever really feel like the villains are weak, because it really starts to chip away at the threat they pose. It's one thing for a villain to run away. That's perfectly natural behavior for a bad guy who feels like they're losing. And sure, some groups will use that as an opportunity to basically mock the villain for being weak, but whenever you have a villain retreat, you are choosing for them to act rationally rather than being this scary, imposing threat. So it's just the nature of, what is your priority in that scene? Do you prefer that the villain act realistically and try to survive? Or do you want a more intense fight to last for a little bit longer? And also, hopefully you can do it in a way that makes it clear that if the villain escapes, they're going to pose a threat in the future. And Matt is really good at that, which is why his players don't tend to mock the villains who flee, because the villains actually pose a greater threat to the party if they escape and lick their wounds, and find another opportunity to fight the players when they have more prep time and more control over the situation. And it's also a totally separate issue when the party exploits a weakness they discovered about the villain. Yes, you want your vampire lord to feel like an incredibly imposing threat, but if the players find a way to expose him to sunlight during the fight, and the vampire is weaker and they're forced to run away, it makes the players not only feel like badasses, but like experts who found a way to corner this villain who ordinarily would be the greatest danger they've ever faced. But I don't quite think that's what's happening in this scene, though, because Matt basically gave them the Shattered Crystal. This is not something they were able to achieve through their own tactics or ingenuity. It's just a thing that happened. Instead of doing research and exploiting a weakness, Thordak just had his own depower me button. It's very video gamey, but more than that, it reduces the tension of this encounter by kind of a lot. And this is so unlike Matt. It's one thing if a villain is starting to run low on resources like spell slots or henchmen or obviously hit points, but Thordak just got less impressive in almost every way possible. It's a really baffling choice, because it essentially encourages this party to feel like the fight is going in their direction, like they've picked up a whole lot of momentum, and Matt basically never structures his combat encounters this way. It's very possible in his games that the villains will get more and more desperate as a fight goes on, but this is usually something that makes them more dangerous, not less. Delilah Briarwood lost her husband, so she ran into the other room and started performing an evil magic ritual. But imagine that before that had happened, Matt had just described how she just unzipped herself down the middle like a cartoon, and a gnome version of Delilah Briarwood ran out of her skin and ducked into the other room to perform a ritual, and she was, like, naked or something. That would pretty dramatically undercut a lot of the threat she posed. There's no actual reason a gnome would be less dangerous as a spellcaster, but it would basically tell the players that she's literally not as big a threat as they thought she was. But it would also kind of feel random, because that is not at all consistent with what had been established about this character so far. And I do think Matt has a reason for this, which we'll get to at the end of the episode. But it is still very strange to essentially undermine your villain in the final few rounds of combat in the huge big boss fight that is theoretically the final fight of the storyline. So unless you have a really good reason to do this in your own games, it's a hard thing for me to recommend you do, at least without the players actually putting in the work to figure out how to make this happen themselves. Anyway, Pike heals Jarrett, but the rest of the players unload attacks on Thordak, pressing the advantage. Vax is literally clinging to him and stabbing him over and over and over again, and as Percy shoots him, at one point Matt narrates that one of Thordak's claws is blown off. He is really illustrating that they are doing a number on him now. Raishan hits Thordak with a lightning bolt, but also clips Vax. Was that collateral damage, or was she trying to thin out her enemies a little bit before they potentially attack her? The players are wondering the same thing. But speaking of lightning spells, Keyleth casts Chain Lightning and Gilmore casts Lightning Bolt, and Thordak uses his final 2 legendary resistances to take half damage on those attacks, which is kind of a sign that Thordak does not have a ton of hit points left, and has to start using these resistances to reduce damage from spells that just do damage to him, rather than saving those for some of the nastier spells an adventuring party might throw at him. But at this point, Thordak needs to make his escape, so he flees into the tunnel behind him. But Vax is still riding on him, so he has to make a save to see if he can hold on to Thordak's scales. He fails the roll, so he falls off and lands on the tunnel floor, but then on his turn, Vax flies after him. And thanks to the Potion of Speed, and his incredible wings, and the bonus action dash he gets as a rogue, he's able to land on Thordak. Matt rules that he has disadvantage on his attacks because he's clinging to a wildly moving creature, so it cancels out the advantage he gets from his Vow of Enmity and nixes the sneak attack. He doesn't get that at all. But Liam still rolls a 24 and a natural 20 with Whisper. Does 59 damage total and gets the how do you want to do this moment. And it's powerful.
I'm going to shove it in so that my hand disappears from view, so I'm up to my forearm, and stab as far in as I can reach. I hear the voice of my mother in the morning. Fuck you.
As the blade plunges into Thordak's now kind of slawing, soft flesh exposed through a series of wounds and gashes left behind by your allies, and his form just slowly shriveling into its diminutive space, the dagger cuts cleanly through, and with that force, you go all the way up to the shoulder as you reach inside. As you finish saying what your phrase, your eyes kind of narrow and you clench your teeth, and as you pull back and yank, there's this strange series of low whispers that into your ears. And as you pull back, you watch as these bits of kind of grayish energy begin to pour out of the air, kind of coalescing around the blades, fitting into the body where you're currently plunged within. As you yank outward, you watch as the blade almost has an extended edge about 10, 15 feet beyond Whisper's actual endless blade that just leaves a giant wound on the side of Thordak's body. You don't even hear an exclamation of pain as Thordak just slowly slams into the ground of this low, barely glowing tunnel. Roll an acrobatics check with disadvantage.
I really like that Matt does not repeat exactly what his players say in character whenever he does the how do you want to do this. We've talked about this before, but the way how do you want to do this moments work is that the players say how they want to kill the creature, and then he basically treats that as a writing prompt and turns it into a more dramatic description, which is kind of hard considering how most of the time his players already provide some really dramatic descriptions of their kills in the first place. But whenever the players include dialogue in their how do you want to do this moments, Matt does not repeat it back to them when he does the recap because he doesn't want to take away the power of what they said by also saying it. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but to me it makes perfect sense. Also, in this moment, it seems like Whisper has leveled up. It has, or not awakened, I think it's become exalted, which is the higher status of vestiges. And I think this is something we're going to talk about another day. This does not seem like the right moment to dive into the way Matt is handling the vestiges and their level ups, but at this moment, Matt felt like, you know what? Vax is literally killing the dragon who killed his mother. That is the perfect moment for a vestige level up. But also, I want to highlight the fact that this kill clearly means a lot to Liam. Because if you'll recall, we talked about this probably a year and a half ago when we first started reviewing the storyline, but Thordak killed Vex and Vax's mother. And only a few episodes after the Chroma Conclave first attacked, Liam's own mother had passed away after being sick for a long time. Now, I truly don't think Matt was waiting for Vax to land a great hit in order to describe Thordak's death. It really does seem to me like Matt was trying everything he could do to keep his ancient red dragon alive, and Liam just happened to be the player who got the kill. But it's also undeniable that this moment was really emotionally charged for Liam. It seems like Liam and Laura had decided that their fictional character's mother was killed by a dragon long before his own mother's health had actually started declining. Although, I don't know that for a fact, maybe it had already begun and he was just folding that into his character, either consciously or subconsciously, even back in their home games. But the fact that this plotline of killing your mother's killer played out right as Liam was dealing with his own mother's passing in real life is really heavy. And truthfully, I don't know if I would have done the same thing in my own games. I am absolutely an advocate for using the metaphors D&D provides us with to deal with the catharsis of our real life. I've been on the record about this for a long time, that I think that Curse of Strahd was as popular as it was, in part because it dropped during the first year of the Trump presidency and during the Me Too movement, and people were able to express their frustration at dealing with real-world predators by getting to murder a fictional predator. Not that we should murder any of the people I just described, but it was an outlet for them. It was cathartic. It's not the only reason, it's also just a well-designed adventure, but I think at the time it was released, it offered the opportunity for a lot of emotional catharsis. But when you're dealing with something as personal as this, I don't know if I would have deployed the Chroma Conclave storyline that I'd had waiting in the wings at the same time that Matt did for his players, because that's a lot to put on a player dealing with this kind of stuff. However, Liam is also one of those players who really values that aspect of this game. He constantly talks about how profound this game is and how much it can speak to what you're going through in real life. So I think it was the right decision. I don't think it would be the right decision for every player, so I think there's a world where it's worth asking your player, we just shined a light on Percy's backstory for the last arc we did, for the Whitestone arc, but I know you have a lot going on personally, so as we're getting ready for whatever's coming next, do you want to stay out of the spotlight for a while? Since your character has an estranged father and a murdered mother, I just don't know if you want me to address any of that yet, or if you'd rather I wait until things have settled down a little bit more with your own real-life family. Now, obviously, there's a risk that the player might read between the lines and deduce that you're planning a storyline where they're going to go kill the dragon that killed their mother, and you don't want to spoil your own plot twists. But I do think it's important to know whether your player is going to be in a good headspace to actually handle this kind of meaty emotional material. Then again, Matt knew this group was heading into higher levels. He knew that he wanted to resolve a lot of different aspects of all these different player character backstories. He knew the Chroma Conclave was the perfect opportunity to weave all these backstories into one storyline as part of a hunt for all these different magic items. I think he knew that if he held off on deploying the Chroma Conclave to do later than he actually did, he might have missed his window to really give a lot of his players some really satisfying stories, because there's a chance that whatever arc they went on to after the Whitestone arc was going to be the final arc of the campaign. And in this case, by having it be the Chroma Conclave storyline, that gave him a chance to incorporate everyone's backstory into one story. But I also think ultimately, he viewed this storyline and this game overall as a gift to his players. And he must have seen that things were getting more serious with Liam's mother's health, and he probably wondered whether it was the right move to deploy the Chroma Conclave at the time he did. And ultimately, he made a judgment call based on the fact that he knows his players really well. And truthfully, the beginning of the storyline was difficult for Liam, especially the fact that Vex died about 1 week apart from when his own mother actually passed. And he was revealed to be a chosen one of the goddess of death when all he wanted was to kind of shut down in that moment. But the storyline played out. Vex came to terms with his new relationship with the Raven Queen. He got through that tough time as a character. They killed the dragon that killed the twins' mother. And we got this moment.
As you watch Thordak's form sputter, roll, and then tumble grinding to a halt, gathering a bunch of stone, broken rock, and part of the cavern that's kind of on the verge of collapsing from the impact of Thordak's body, now lifeless, still in the darkness of the subterranean tunnel. We're gonna take a break.
We don't even know it's happened yet, though. It's all underground.
She would know.
I do know. Can I fly forward before we take the break?
If you want to.
I just want to fly forward and hug my brother as he's just covered in dragon guts.
Down in the hole.
He's
Yeah.
way down in there. It's a long flight.
You just did.
And now we'll take a break.
Now, with all of that being said, boy, Thordak was kind of easy to kill, wasn't he? Don't get me wrong, the party definitely earned their victory through preparation, but outside of getting the vestiges and making sure they had some protection against fire damage, which Matt gave them by having the NPCs hand them a bunch of magic potions that protect them against fire damage, and besides some clever spell usage and choices of who would take which magic item, and shattering the crystal that Matt did for them, Thordak really wasn't a huge threat to them. Sure, he was definitely doing a number on their hit points. Pike got really low on health, Grog took a ton of abuse, but it was still just 7 party members and a couple of NPCs against really just one big bad guy and a couple of more minor adversaries who joined the fight partway through. And ordinarily, this is just something that can happen in D&D. Sometimes you prep this really awesome encounter, and your players just steamroll over it. It happens, and there's no use in beating yourself up over it. Not every fight is going to be the Kevdak fight, which is still probably the gold standard of Critical Role combats, at least that I can think of. But this was different. Thordak literally got dramatically less imposing and less powerful partway through the fight. This is not a situation where it just kind of turns out that the bad guy wasn't as powerful as he could have been because of how their stat block works or how they were deployed or the situation that happened when initiative actually rolled or some smart choices the players made early on. No, Matt made a very conscious choice to make Thordak get weaker partway through the fight. This is the party's 7th time fighting a dragon in the campaign, 5th time doing so on stream with an audience watching and tweeting their suggestions and critiques. Matt had to realize by now that a good dragon fight is about a lot more than just dropping a dragon on the field and hoping that the stat block does the work for you. I remember right around the time this episode came out, right after actually, Matt Colville made a great video where he basically talked about how the Ancient Red Dragon stat block in 5th edition is a little bit underwhelming and used that as an opportunity to extol the virtues of 4th edition. And it's a really good video that makes a lot of excellent points. But I do think that inherent to that framing is the assumption that Matt Mercer must have realized partway through this encounter that Thordak was kind of punching below his weight, and that's a shame. He's not delivering all the tension and drama you want from a dragon fight like this. But I have to assume Matt Mercer knew that was going to be the case, or at least he certainly wasn't worried about making Thordak seem less imposing, because he literally gave him a glowing gem that made him less scary and less powerful, and he made the players break it. They didn't choose to do that, he did. So why do that? Why take the big ultimate villain this entire storyline has been building up to for almost a year, ignore some of the lore you've established about how that crystal actually works, and consciously make him a lot less formidable right in the middle of the final fight? Well, the cast might be wondering the same thing when they come back from break, because Matt just drops them back into initiative. There's still a fire giant on the field who hasn't taken any damage, and a lizard man riding on a wyvern.
We're fighting this fucking giant thing?
Yeah, man.
Jesus.
Grog, Scanlan, and Percy are able to take down the fire giant in literally just 3 turns. Not rounds, turns. Grog didn't even take his turn, he just took a retaliation strike in return for being attacked on the fire giant's turn, and I think he gets the how do you want to do this for doing that. Sam even says, who would have thought a fire giant would be so easy? Now this is the cool thing about being a higher level character, you get to walk right over villains who used to leave you quaking in your boots. But it is also kind of the problem with any sort of battle like this where you have to deal with all the other remaining villains on the ground because they don't know their leader is dead yet, so there's no reason for them to surrender. Now the alternative would be for them all to just collapse when their leader is killed, like the battle droids in Star Wars or the aliens in the first Avengers film, and I rarely ever think that's the solution unless you have some lore reason why that would be the case. But that being said, a lot of this just feels kind of anticlimactic. Like, you could have just said, okay, you kill them, let's jump back to what's really important. But then we see the real reason that we are still in initiative, why we can't handwave and say that everyone's done fighting things. It actually has very little to do with the villains on the battlefield. Well, most of them. It has everything to do with one villain still on the battlefield. Because Percy calls for them to jump down into the pit, and no, Percy's not the villain I was talking about, although I can understand the confusion. But Raishan is the first one to head into the pit herself, because she's faster than the rest of the party. So the relative speeds of all these party members is going to matter a lot for this next sequence. We're kind of doing the thing that I hate, where everyone is moving in the same direction, but we're handling it in initiative order, so everyone is moving kind of jerkily. One character moves, and then another one catches up, and then that first character keeps moving. That's the perfect example of a scenario where initiative does a really bad job replicating what the player characters are experiencing. Quite frankly, I loved it back in episode 39 when Matt just ignored that rule and allowed them all to move as a group all together when the Conclave first attacked and they all fled to the tree. But in this case, not only is not everyone running all at once, like the Wyvern is still attacking the heroes on the surface, so initiative does still matter, but also, even if all of our characters and NPCs were all running in the same direction, they don't all share the same objectives. This isn't everybody running to the same destination as a group. It's a race. Vox Machina versus Raishan. So yeah, you do kind of have to stay in initiative order, because it matters a lot whether Keyleth and Percy and their friends can reach Vex and Vax before Raishan does whatever she's planning to do. Raishan arrives at Thordak's corpse right next to the twins, and Vax is already on his earring, basically asking Keyleth, what are they going to do? What should the twins do? Keyleth is ignoring the Wyvern and running to the pit, but she only just reaches the edge of the pit with her full turn, so she can't get down to Raishan and Thordak. Meanwhile, we've got Kima and Jarrett and Grog versus the Wyvern, and as Travis rolls his attacks, Matt says he doesn't even need to roll damage. He's going to kill the Wyvern no matter what. And that's awesome. Great work from Matt to keep the fight moving, to make Travis feel like a badass, and to get past this pretty quickly because it's not the most important thing happening right now. Gilmore dimension doors towards the pit, getting to the edge as well. But the twins and Raishan are basically in the middle of the tunnel. And 70 feet past them, further down, it opens up to a chamber. And they're starting to keep an eye on that and see what's going to go on down there, but they can't make any details of it from where they are, beyond just like a faint orange glow, warmth, and sulfur. As Vex inches a little closer, she can see there's some sort of lava flow inside, but that's it. Vex and Raishan are watching each other very carefully, as Raishan begins to do exactly what they talked about back when she recruited them. She's going to find out Thordak's secret. And Vax prompts Keyleth again, what do we do? She asks him to describe the scene because, well, Marisha knows what's going on, Keyleth does not, and she doesn't want a metagame. Vax just asks, hit or wait? And she says, wait until I'm there, so he holds his turn as well. But she does say, don't let her touch him. Raishan produces a scroll case from inside her scales, pulls out a scroll, and starts to read it. And that is enough provocation for Vax to want to interrupt whatever's happening. As far as he's concerned, Keyleth said, don't let her touch him, and this definitely qualifies, so he throws 3 daggers. Raishan finishes reading the scroll. Thordak's body does not move, but breath returns to his lips. And Matt clarifies that it looks very similar to a Speak with Dead spell. That's an important thing to be clear about, because not only is it something the players would recognize, like, as Liam says, they've seen Pike do this before, but But it's also really important for the players to be very aware of the fact that Raishan's not resurrecting Thordak. She's, so far, just communicating with his corpse. But Raishan basically warns Vax not to go down this road, but he just tells her she's going to die today. This is exactly what the party had decided back in their Halloween episode. All the players were on the same page that they could not allow her to get whatever information she wanted from Thordak's corpse. So based off that reply from him, that she's going to die, she says, "Come and claim me," and flies further down the tunnel and into the chamber below. Laura had readied her action to shoot if Raishan attacked them, but she's really on the fence about whether that qualified. After all, she said something threatening to Vax, but she didn't attack him, and Vax fired first. But she decides she'll attack, but even as she does so, she doesn't feel great about this. As she's rolling, she says, "This isn't about vengeance, you guys." To her, trying to kill Thordak was different because Thordak had killed her mother. But when she says it's not about vengeance, Marisha responds, "It is for Keyleth." Because sure, Vex and Vax killed the dragon that killed their mother, but Raishan obliterated most of the Fire Ashari and most of the Tal'Dorei Council, and Keyleth was very clear she was going to inflict vengeance on Raishan. But I think it's interesting that Vex is at the place in her personal arc where she's not sure if this action is justified, since Raishan didn't really provoke them in this moment. But she does attack and does a little bit of damage. At this point, Keyleth arrives, and the three of them move down into the chamber, and Jarrett and Gilmore are close behind them. On the surface, Grog is annihilating the last of the lizard folk, and then he follows, with Scanlan, Percy, and Kima, though they're a little bit behind. When the half-elves enter this chamber, they're the first ones in. They see there are a bunch of alcoves in the walls and ceiling. And around the room there are 5 huge dragon eggs, each one about 9 feet tall, and all of them have some sort of crystalline nature to them, just like Thordak did. And then Raishan pokes her head out of an alcove in the ceiling, she casts a spell, and then some portals appear on the ceiling. And 4 meteors rocket out of the portals and slam into the ground, dealing 63 fire damage, halved, and 70 bludgeoning damage. Vax evades it and takes no damage, like Spider-Man in Infinity War, which, by the way, he's definitely casting Meteor Swarm in that scene, right? Not Spider-Man, but Thanos. That's a Meteor Swarm spell. Keyleth has 18 hit points left, and Vex is knocked unconscious, but after the episode they realized that they did the math wrong, and so Matt tweeted out that she was still conscious after all, so they didn't have to wait 2 weeks to find out if she was going to live. Well, in a roundabout way they did, but she wasn't going to be making death saves in the new year. But that's where they end the game. They have to wait until after Christmas and New Year's to get the resolution to this moment. And Travis asks what that spell was, and Matt says that it was Meteor Swarm, a 9th level spell. And this is why Thordak was so easy to defeat, because he never actually was the final boss. Now that idea has been contradicted slightly by some other statements Matt made in the future, and we'll talk more about those in future episodes, but I do get the impression from some of his comments that he wasn't really sure whether or not the party would actually keep their agreement with Raishan or betray her, as they assured Keyleth that they would do. But what I do know is that Matt had long telegraphed that she had a lot more magic than most dragons do, or even, indeed, more magic than most spellcasters they encounter. I believe when they talked to the Fire Ashari about Raishan, she was described as casting a spell similar to Meteor Swarm. They didn't put it together at the time, but now they have confirmation. And speaking dramatically, Raishan was the first dragon they interacted with back in episode 39. She's the one who slammed down in front of them, who Grog rolled a 19 to attack and missed, who blasted the council with poison breath. This all started with Raishan. I think it was always going to end with Raishan. And I remember a lot of viewers at the time being pretty critical of the fact that Matt had this ancient green dragon cast her 9th level spell when there were only 3 targets in the room, basically wasting it when it could have been used to attack way more members of the party. But I think what Matt's doing is exactly the same thing he did back in episode 75, when he used the final moments of the episode to have the Pit Fiend summon an Aaron to join him in combat. I don't think Matt cared that much about how much damage this Meteor Swarm spell would actually do, or how many party members it would hit. I think he wanted his players to understand that Raishan was a high enough level spellcaster that she could cast a 9th level spell, because he needed them to understand this was not just going to be another dragon fight. This was not going to be a repeat of Thordak. And what's funny is, Liam's reaction is, hey, she blew her wad, she cast her 9th level spell, she's done. But the other players say, no, she's not. Because I think the rest of the party picks up on what Matt is trying to establish. If Raishan has a 9th level spell, that means she also has 8th level spells, 7th level spells, 6th level spells. She is at least a 17th level spellcaster. Because that's how Matt designs his bad guys. They saw it with Kevdak and his Fighter Barbarian multiclass, and Greenbeard, the Circle of the Moon Druid, and Ripley, the Gunslinger Wizard multiclass. Matt doesn't just give his bad guys a couple of spells, they often have character class levels. And if they have any spells, that means they have the entire selection of spells a character would have if they had gotten to that level. In Matt Mercer's games, an NPC doesn't just get 9th level spells unless they earned them, which means along the way, they got all the same spells that a player would get before they had access to 9th level spells. So Matt is telling his players not to underestimate Raishan, because she is a much, much more powerful spellcaster than they had ever imagined. And ultimately, It's okay that Thordak was defeated kind of easily, because he wasn't ever really the final bad guy. And the final dragon they have to deal with now has way more powerful spells than they thought she did.
It's time for you to die.
Huh. That was really easy. What the hell? Winnie the Pooh? Ugh, I came here to kill you, but I can't believe you've unmasked me and revealed that I'm actually Winnie the Pooh, a beloved children's character who is now a bad guy. And now that you've removed my mask, I've lost all of me power. What? But that's not... No, I saw under your mask already. Not your mask, actually. It was future Mike. It was me from the future wearing that mask. I already saw that. That was already... Also, what do you mean, now that you've lost your mask, you've lost your power? That was not a thing. What's going on?
Good job, Mike. It looks like this storyline is finally over.
What are you talking about? Odwick, what is happening? Future Mike was Winnie the Pooh the whole time? That doesn't make any sense. That's how this ends? He's just gone? What happened to Future Mike?
Well, now that he's gone, you can focus on making more videos, because he won't be getting in the way anymore.
That does not make any sense.
Sure it does.
No, we saw who was under the mask. We know it was not Winnie the Pooh, it was me from the future.
Well, he's gone, and he won't be slowing things down for you anymore. So now you can focus on making more videos. Maybe you can make some videos about some more current products and topics. Get in on the zeitgeist a little bit.
You did this, didn't you?
Oh.
You did something.
No, you did this all yourself. You beat Future Geek Mike.
No, that's a good name for him.
I know, right? That was one of your commenters. Jack Sharks came up with that name.
Oh, cool. But no, you did something to Future Geek Mike. Where is he?
I told you, you defeated him. You don't have to worry about him anymore. Anyway, I have some ideas for your next videos.
No, I'm not making any more videos until you tell me what's going on.
Okay, I didn't want to have to do this. But you are making more videos. A lot more videos. And you're going to give the audience exactly what they want from you.
What are you talking about? What is this? What's happening?